Hello, and welcome to the I3 lecture series hosted by the Masters in Digital Photography program at the School of Visual Arts. We are thrilled to welcome Margaret Erb as tonight's guest speaker. Margaret is the founder and director of the Saul Leiter Foundation, which is dedicated to preserving the art and legacy of Saul Leiter, a true pioneer of color photography. Starting in 1996, Margaret closely assisted Leiter for over 18 years. She has worked on several books for the artist, including Saul Leiter Early Color and Saul Leiter Early Black and White. In 2012, she helped produce the exhibition Saul Leiter Retrospective at the House of Photography, Deichtorhallen, Hamburg. She's co-producer of the film Saul Leiter in No Great Hurry, released in 2013. Today, Margaret maintains Leiter's extensive archive located in his former home in Manhattan's East Village, and she is currently working on a digital catalog raisonné and several upcoming publications on Leiter's art. So please help me in welcoming Margaret Erb to our lecture series.
Thank you. I am so happy to be here, and I've really enjoyed putting together some images for you all to see tonight, and I heard that this crowd likes pictures, and it looks like you do. So I've got lots of pictures. So let's get to it. So I'm pleased to show you images from Saul's archive today. My hope is that these images will reveal to you a little bit about who Saul was, and perhaps give you a better understanding of his archive and its future. So if you can imagine, this talk is kind of like a large puzzle with many pieces, so it may first appear a little abstract, but bear with me. I'll go back and forth between recent history, the past, the future, and in the end I hope that you'll leave here with a really more complete picture of a very special artist. So let's get started by going way back, say mere 70 years, and it's 1946. A 23-year-old Saul Leiter has quit rabbinical school and moved to New York City to pursue painting. What possessed him to make such a break for it? And what gave him the idea that he actually might survive? He defied his father, he defied his family's expectations that he would become a studied rabbi. He takes a bus, he lands in New York. His mother sends him some money, infrequently. He has a sweet and concerned Aunt Esther in Brooklyn, who may have fed him a dinner or two. He sleeps in Central Park a few times. He manages to rent a series of unfurnished rooms and sleeps on floors. He tries his hand as a meatpacker and a messenger boy. He paints with gouache and cassine on paper, placed on the floors of his various rooms. His friend, a painter named Richard Poussadart, gives him the idea to pick up a camera as a way to make money. Later, also his friend, the photographer Gene Smith, gives him a camera, and the rest, they say, is history, or in Saul's case, a mystery. Now, let's flash forward several decades, and starting in 2006, after a life mostly in obscurity, Saul's work has experienced a surge of popularity. Especially his color work. Today, he is considered by many to be one of the great masters of photography, and possibly even one of the great colorists of the 20th century. In the last 8 years of his life, Saul experienced a sort of funny limelight full of worldwide adorations. In his 80s, he saw an appreciation that he had certainly not asked for, not even waited for, but nevertheless rightfully deserved for so many years. To many still, Saul Leiter remains a mysterious character, not well explained, not easily explained, an artist who in the last few years seems to have suddenly risen to fame. So who was Saul Leiter, and where has he been? These are the types of questions I most often get when speaking with audiences today. I don't know if you can recognize it, but it's actually a Veselka in the East Village. It's hard to even begin describing Saul as a person. Being with Saul was a resonating experience. He was full of insight, he was wise, funny, lovable, superbly smart, the best conversations you've ever had. He could quickly put you in your place, so you had to be careful with your opinions and be sure to explain yourself well. He was so much fun to goof around with. He could crack up laughing to such a point that you would worry that he might pass out. He had a slow and plodding way of speaking, and actually I have a little bit of audio. This is Saul talking about the history of color in art, and it was something that he liked to talk about a lot. It's just about a minute.
I mean, the history of art from the beginning of time is a history of color. The great Renaissance paintings, the great Impressionist paintings, they're full of color. Degas said somewhere he'd like to spend I think he said that he would like to spend his lifetime drawing just a hand in black and white, something like that. But the fact remains that he did make thousands of paintings of color. I think the art world is afflicted with mistaken notions during certain periods, and they become very prevalent, and people take them very seriously, and then eventually they're abandoned and seen as rather silly and unimportant. Color has always aroused suspicion in the minds of certain people.
Food for thought. So to continue describing Saul, I think it's important to recognize that he was a painter at heart. Saul had a passion and an incredible knowledge of art history. He was completely self-taught and would have made a great art history professor. Saul loved his paintbrushes, but he also loved cameras. He was an embracer of new technologies. Saul was a great interviewer and interviewed all of those who dared to be interviewed. It was a bit like falling into a trap for some. In the last few years of his life, we had journalists coming and sitting in this very chair with this very view. And I think some of them were quite intimidated. Saul had a chaotic work environment, and yet everything had its place. Saul lived in the same apartment in the East Village for 60 years. He moved into his apartment in 1953. Most of his photographs were taken in a few blocks radius of this apartment. He viewed life simply, even though things weren't always simple for him. Saul was my close friend for 18 years. I started working for Howard Greenberg Gallery in 1995, and I became Saul's representative. I took full responsibility for Saul, and not just in the business way, but personally too. I realized early on that what was very easy for me to do helped him greatly, and I helped him over some bumps just by being there. The fame and success and the public attention came much later and toward the end of our friendship. So, I get to a special turning point in Saul's life. In 1995, Saul was given funding from the Ilford Paper Company to print with Philippe Lamont, one of the world's great printers, who had a lab here in New York. Saul and Philippe worked for many years printing from Saul's early slides from the 1950s. So that was Kodachrome, Ektachrome, Anscochrome. Together they created a portfolio of prints, mostly of New York street scenes, but also some of Paris and London and some of Saul's 60s fashion work. This time in the art world, photo galleries almost never exhibited color. Museums like the Modern were a bit more daring and were having some color exhibitions. However, collectors and auction houses were largely staying away from color. Nowadays, with everything in color, it's hard to believe. It is these images by Saul that have changed our previous understanding of the history of color photography. And this is the first of a few slideshows that are in my talk. And And I think the word slideshow are actually important here, because this was how these images were originally shown. So if you can imagine there's a projector behind all of us, and it's whirling away, and it's making sounds as the slides go in and out of the machines. The room is dark, and that's what we see. Close, similar to what we have in front of us, but this is the last image for this particular part. I actually just came across this image today. It's never been printed in photographic form. It's never been published before. It was just on a hard drive that Philippe Lamont gave to me. The Howard Greenberg Gallery exhibited Saul's work twice in the 90s with a good deal of success and with wonderful reviews. But when his work was off the walls, it seemed like he was instantly forgotten. We tried to get Saul a book, tried to get him a book made, and it ran into a series of publishers who actually misled us. But Saul was used to being ignored. He lived with his partner, a lovely lady and talented painter named Soames Bantry. Together they had zero money, except for the money loaned to them by friends. Saul painted and photographed daily, and things remained like this for many years. And then, sometimes in this world, a book can change everything. This is Saul's Little Book of Color, the 2006 book that changed the very conversation about the use of color in photography. This book created a spectacular twist of fate for Saul, and the art world was sent scratching its head. Who was this man, and how could he possibly have taken all these color photographs going as far back as 1948? Saul became famous overnight. He was yanked into the limelight, seemingly against his will, and it is now believed that his work in color and photography altered the curriculum of photo history and possibly the history of abstract expressionism. The only requisite that Saul had for this little book was that it be about this big so that it could fit on his nightstand. Saul's newfound fame rested lightly on him. Within about a month of the book being published, we had calls from Europe, curators in Europe. Within a month, he had made enough sales to turn his loans around. I think fame was often a source of entertainment for him. I don't know if you can catch that, but that's sort of their view, and then this is Saul's pictures of all the press in Paris. I think sometimes fame was an invasion for Saul. Eventually, Saul refused to be interviewed. I think it just became frustrating for him. And there were too many requests. And in fact, Annie Leibovitz called up and asked to photograph Saul for Vanity Fair. He refused with some strong words. After the book came out, the gallery started to really sell his work for the first time. Life for Saul did not change that much. He was able to pay his bills. He was prolific every day. He would often come to the door with a paintbrush in his hands. His daily life was spent painting, drinking coffee, a lot of coffee, and reading a lot of books. He carried his camera everywhere. He took pictures. He frequented the Strand bookstore and his favorite Starbucks on 2nd Avenue. He had lunch with friends. Once a week, he would take a bus to visit me in the gallery, and one day a week, I would come to his studio and work for him. Saul passed away on November 26, 2013, 1 week before his 90th birthday. His obituary came out in the New York Times on Thanksgiving Day. Losing Saul was a big blow for me. Fortunately, the lawyers and the executors of the estate permitted me to work in the apartment from day one. I was given the keys, and I was handed a great responsibility to get things organized and keep things going, as it were. But unlocking the apartment on that first day gave me a sinking, lonely feeling. But the early days of numbness and ache turned into weeks and months of making order out of disorder. I received lots of help from a family of friends, many of whom are here tonight. And launching myself, even if it was somewhat blindly, into this huge responsibility was a welcomed distraction. So, following Saul's directives in his will and knowing his wishes, I was able to form the Saul Leiter Foundation in 2014. The foundation, which includes Saul's archive, is located today in Saul's former home. There we go. So I'm sure you can all read that, but I'll also read it for you. The Saul Leiter Foundation is dedicated to preserving the art of American photographer and painter Saul Leiter. The foundation maintains Leiter's life's work and supports activities to advance his legacy through exhibitions, books, and other media. Sounds pretty simple. Once the foundation was in place, the archives helpers and I felt even more courageous to handle the urgent tasks at hand, which was creating permanent archival storage and organization for prints, negatives, slides, and paintings. And saving ephemera, that's a word, that if you don't know it, I'll teach you that word tonight. That included countless items like cameras, slide projectors, darkroom supplies, studio equipment, date books, receipts, going back to, what was it, Anders, like 52? 1750. Invoices, correspondence, family photos, typewriters. We found, I think, 4 or 5 typewriters. Paintbrushes, pens, Super 8 film, audio tapes, 3,000 books. All items that one day might be used as interpretive keys. That's another word for ephemera that I learned this weekend when I was reading that article about Bob Dylan and the sale and donation to University of Tulsa. It's an interesting article if you haven't read it, but yeah, so interpretive keys to understanding Saul. There were many days that we did not know where to begin. Someone came in and told me, you know, you should really save Saul's stove because that's where his dark room was. That's where the enlarger sat on. You should really save the stove. And I looked at the stove and it was covered with paint and it looked like it weighed about 600 pounds. And so I couldn't. Oh, so you like pictures of kids? Yeah, me too. Almost right away, we discovered boxes of early photos of Saul and his family members that he had carefully kept all these years. I met Saul when he was 71 years old, and he was 89 when he died. I never knew Saul as his younger self, and yet he was easily recognizable to me. The photos I discovered expanded the many stories that he had told me himself. For example, in 1931, when Saul was 8, he spent a year in Vienna with his mother and his 2 siblings, David and Debbie. He visited his grandparents and his father's family in Poland as well. I think you realize that's Saul on your right side. Yeah. Saul took up painting at 16 years old. His mother thought it would be a fine and acceptable hobby, and was okay if he used the top floor of the house, of course only after his studies in the Talmud were completed for the day. When no one was supervising him, Saul snuck into the library at the University of Pittsburgh and launched himself on a personal voyage through the history of art. European, American, African. He especially loved French Impressionism. He loved Picasso, Manet, Monet, Matisse. His greatest love was for the post-impressionists Bonnard and Vuillard. He also loved Japanese art and Japanese calligraphy. Saul's discoveries in the library may have given him a window to the world that changed his life. Saul once told me that he felt that Japanese calligraphy was the highest form of art. Saul took up photography as a teenager in the 1930s. He begged his mother for a Ditrola, which was a plastic camera, and she succumbed, according to Saul. His first model and his primary model for many years was his sister Deborah. And actually, this is a treat especially for you all tonight. These are the first time that these images have probably ever been seen. Saul always said that he was not born in this country. He was born in his father's house. And that's Saul on your left, of course. Jewish orthodoxy is a dynastic culture. The family is center of the universe and the father is king. Saul's father was a great Talmudic scholar with published writings from age 13 on. Saul's father was made rabbi at the age of 18. He was fluent in 7 languages. He had an international reputation and is still remembered today in the Jewish Orthodox community. He was portrayed when Saul left rabbinical school to become an artist in New York. And to him and his world, photography was akin to pornography. Really, there was never a reconciliation. Saul came from a generation of rabbis, brothers, father, uncles, grandfather, great-grandfather, and all the way back hundreds of years. By the way, all of these men died in the Holocaust, except for Saul's father, which is on your left, and that's Saul's grandfather on your right, who died in Poland. A formal education had been difficult for Saul. This is one of my favorite images of Saul because he looks like he's in prison or about to go to prison. Well, he excelled in his studies, achieving all A's, and we found report cards with all of his A's, all the way back through elementary school. He was a restless student. He attended public school in Pittsburgh during the day, and in the early morning before school, he studied with a Hebrew tutor, and in the hours after school, he studied with a Talmudic tutor. Saul said that his extracurricular work added up to an extra 4 to 5 hours of study a day. He became fluent in Hebrew and efficient in German. At age 18, Saul enrolled in the University of Pittsburgh, but dropped out after the first semester. After that, his father convinced him to go to rabbinical school in Cleveland. He dropped out again and returned to Pittsburgh after only 1 year. According to Saul, his parents believed they had a real situation on their hands. He looks like a real situation in that picture. All this time in the early 40s, Saul kept painting and exhibiting in Pittsburgh and in Cleveland. One fateful day, a painting of his was bought by these two men, strangers visiting Pittsburgh from New York City. These two men were Merce Cunningham and John Cage. Kind of a strange coincidence, but yeah, I mean, it's just remarkable. These two men may have given Saul the moment and the courage in 1946 to leave home, jump on a bus, and move to New York City to be an artist. I don't know after that how Saul became reacquainted or acquainted with Merce Cunningham and John Cage. We have seen several photographs of the two of them in rehearsal spaces, and one of John Cage's feet behind a piano. So I know that he became reacquainted for at least a few years, and somehow they then got out of touch. One of the many surprises I had in organizing Saul's work after his passing was the discovery of a vast number of images that he printed in black and white. Saul had previously, before his little book came out, been known as a New York school photographer. He still is. He's included in Jane Livingston's New York school book, which was a book that grouped together, I think, 9 or 12 photographers from 1936 to 63. And they were known for their use of light, use of high-speed film, and sort of their snapshot aesthetic. But I still think that Saul sort of stands outside of that group. Other members of the New York School, I'm sure some of you know that, are Robert Frank, William Klein, Diane Arbus. I don't know if any of you saw the film Carol, but Mary Engel was just reminding me about it. There's actually a shot in that movie that's almost exactly like this. And Todd Haynes, the director, said that he had used Saul's influence in the cinematography of that movie. Recently, we completed the cataloging of Saul's fashion work in print. In 1957, Saul took a small sampling of his color slides to meet with Henry Wolfe, who was then the art director at Esquire. Every month, Esquire would have a portfolio review day. You could make an appointment and meet with an art director and show your work. It's hard to believe that a 34-year-old Saul Leiter managed to find his way to the offices of Esquire. My friend Robert Benton, who was associate at Esquire that day in 1957, describes Saul's appearance at the office door. The secretary had rung him through. He appeared at the front door, and Benton describes Saul as looking like an unmade bed. Saul's fashion career took off and lasted almost 2 decades, primarily working for his friend Henry at Harper's Bazaar. Saul was hugely successful as a fashion photographer. He traveled to France, the UK, Mexico. He did hundreds of covers and spreads for Harper's Bazaar alongside Richard Avedon and Hero. And it was those 3 men that I'm told dominated the pages of Harper's Bazaar for almost a decade. Oh, by the way, I'll just quickly add that this was a cover that he did for Harper's. He gave the slide to his friend Henry. He said, "Henry, I'm sorry, but some of it got exposed. It was the end of the film, and that's why there's this big band of color light." And Henry looked at it and said, "That is a brilliant cover, I'm going to use it." And to me, it's just a wonderful example of a collaboration between an art director and a photographer. And also a wonderful result of Saul accepting failures in his use of film and his acceptance of outdated film. That's his partner Soames Bantry, by the way.
What happened to her?
She passed away in 2002. Yeah, unfortunately, and missed his rise to fame. But she always knew that he was good. Saul left the fashion world, or maybe a better way of saying it is that he defected. One day he looked up from his camera and saw behind him a dozen people supervising his work. My friend Robert Benton tells the story well. There were art directors, designers, executives, and their assistants, and their assistants' assistants. The story goes that Saul took his cameras and walked off the set. And by doing this, he turned his back on financial stability almost for the rest of his life. I think for Saul, there was no choice about it. He was not about to collaborate with bureaucracy. This is yet another area of Saul's contribution in photography that has yet to be fully seen. We've cataloged about 1,000 prints. There are probably about 200,000 slides that sit in cold storage today waiting to be organized and seen. So what happened to Saul's idea of becoming a painter? Well, he never stopped painting. He painted throughout his life. He developed, he evolved, he was prolific. Ideally, he did everything an artist could hope to do. He made thousands of paintings. However, his paintings have rarely been seen or sold. He had a few exhibitions early in the 50s, but sold only about 10 paintings in his lifetime. Today, his entire painting career, a mere 70 years, is almost all intact. The small staff at the archive spent a year and a half photographing and cataloging all these paintings. We just finished in January, and we are now working with an appraiser who's helping us understand Saul's place as a painter and perhaps his future recognition. We think the world still has yet another surprise coming from Saul Leiter. His paintings are beautiful, bold, emotional, stunning, sophisticated. His sketchbooks are nothing less than sublime, but that's just our opinion. In Saul's quiet time, after his fashion career was over, in the 1970s and through the 1990s, he took to painting his photographs. The gallery and I saw these painted nudes over the years, but had no idea of the quantity that existed. We found many of these inside Saul's library, inside his books, as if they were intended only to live as bookmarks. Saul, I'm going to show you a few more painted nudes, but Saul photographed the nude extensively, going back to his early days in photography and throughout the 60s, shooting in black and white, not in color. And these are gelatin silver prints. Most of them are less than 8 by 10 inches. Painted over with gouache and casein. So, preservation is still a primary goal and activity for the foundation for today, and still most urgent part of our mission. Saul had many cameras in his lifetime. He rarely sold one. So today, all of his cameras are almost all together. And I think as you look through these next few slides that I'm going to show you, think about how when Saul used these cameras, they were new technology. They weren't retro technology. They were new for the period. And then technology, as it does, advanced, and he adapted new cameras, and he took on new technology. But his lifetime in photography spans from the 40s until 2013. So just think about it, that as you're looking at what these, the range of cameras here reflects. Many, many Leicas, which he used predominantly in the 50s. A Rolly. Lots and lots of Canons, which we see him using in pictures and self-portraits through the 80s and 90s. And then this is incredible. In 2004, when Saul had absolutely no money, Olympus gives him a digital SLR. It probably weighed about 20 pounds. And it was, and they also gave him $10,000 in funding that he could use whatever he wanted. And that really helped Saul at that point. He gave the camera to me, and I took it home for the weekend, and I learned how to use it. I had never used myself. This is 2004. I had not used a digital camera before. Came back the next week, showed him how to use it. He then went on to buy 25 more digital cameras in his lifetime, and every time he bought one, I went home, I learned how to use it, I came back, I taught him how to use it. We kept this camera, but the rest of the digital cameras, except for a few, I kept one myself, we donated to ICP. The contents of his kitchen darkroom have been preserved for future ephemera, there's that word again, for research and use in exhibitions. So you may see it one day, maybe at ICP or somewhere. Saul's faithful light table. This is where early color was created. This is a small sampling of maybe 2 suitcases worth of undeveloped film. If you look closely, you'll see, let's see, along the bottom you see black and white film, very early in the 40s. You see one Kodachrome box that says September 1958. So this is all undeveloped film. So Saul took the pictures, came home, took it out of the camera, put it in a bag, and there it stood. Nothing happened to it. The dilemma now is that no one develops Kodachrome film. The last lab shut down many years ago, and this film cannot be developed now. There is one man I heard in Rochester who said he could develop it, but it would be in black and white. So it's probably not going to happen. It's a bit of a race against time for some of the film which we can develop, like the black and white film. The developed negatives, now this is another race against time. These are glassine envelopes that the negatives are in. And as far as we can tell, they haven't hurt, or they don't have that burnt look. Haven't hurt the negatives, but I'm told that eventually they all have to come out of the negative sleeves and into new sleeves. I did a quick calculation when I was at the APAG conference at ICP, and I realized that we would have to get 12,000 envelopes. So side storage has gone from looking like this to this, which is an air-conditioned storage space in Lower Manhattan. Those are boxes of slides, maybe 300,000 slides. And I'm told that air-conditioned storage space is not good enough. It actually needs to be in a freezer. So we're getting there. The photographs went from being stored like this to being stored like this in one of our many secure and well-insured storage areas. And by the way, I registered the archive as an art heritage site, and supposedly if there's a flood on East 10th Street or a fire or something, that they will actually come and help you save the art. I don't know if they're going to come in a canoe, an SUV, I don't know, but someone's supposed to come. Digitizing. Today we are actively photographing and photographing and cataloging into a digital database with the idea that one day all of Saul's art will be captured in this digital database. It's called a catalog, almost like a catalog digital catalog raisonné. It gives us wonderful abilities to track location, size, signage, condition, ownership, location, categories. It's wonderful. The Saul Leiter Foundation hopes to help those who wish to do research on Saul and his art, and hope that one day they will have the opportunity to put him into a context of their own, whether they be journalists or writers or curators. There's a wonderful collection, if you don't know of it yet, at FIT of all the Harper's Bazaar magazines that were ever published. We're in the last stages of creating a comprehensive website, which may be an excellent place to start. After early color, there were 5 books produced for Saul in his lifetime. In 2014, the great German publisher put out Saul Leiter Early Black and White, which was in 2 volumes. And it was wonderful because the publisher, Gerhard Steidl, had someone place the books in my hand the moment I got off stage talking at Saul's memorial. So it was a lovely gesture. Last year we created a book of Saul's painted nudes. You'll remember the bookmarks. And now, with the help of my co-editor, Robert Benton, we are working on another book based on Saul's nudes and intimate portraits. And I think the working title seems to be now Saul Leiter in My Room. So, in 2008, the Howard Greenberg Gallery was contacted by a young and talented filmmaker named Thomas Leach, and a film was made. Saul would never have done a film with just anyone, and the film would never have been done if it hadn't been for Thomas's patience, his flexibility, and also his sensitivity towards Saul. Thomas was incredibly eager to please Saul and never pushed him. It actually took Thomas and I almost a year to convince Saul to do the film. In the end, his conditions were put to us very simply. He had to meet Thomas first, so Thomas flew over from London to have a meeting over coffee. And absolutely no film crew, no lighting person, no audio technician. It was just to be Saul and Thomas, and sometimes me in the background. A digital SLR was used with a remote mic. Sometimes Thomas was only allowed to film for 20 minutes and sometimes a few hours. Each time Thomas had to fly over from London. He let Saul be totally in control and promised not to release the film unless Saul approved. Now think about it, that is a huge risk for a filmmaker to take. Thankfully, in 2012, Saul watched the film and gave Thomas the go-ahead. And actually there's a part in the film where Saul looks straight into the camera and he says, I actually haven't given you permission yet to bring out this film. It's this wonderful part in the movie. So we've gone on in the years since Saul's passing and had 5 exhibitions. One was at Toulouse in France. It was just 30 photographs, and they had 20,000 visitors within 10 days. Howard Greenberg Gallery put on an exhibition of the early black and white work. You can find that online. Roger Schmulewitz in Antwerp did an early black and white show. A year ago in Frankfurt, they did an exhibition at the Forum there. And now an exhibition at the Photographers Gallery in London, which is a small museum in Soho. I think it's about 120 images, including paintings, and the painted nudes. The opening, there were 800 people there in January. The first Saturday, they had 1,700 people in a room maybe just twice the size of this room. They actually had a crowd control issue. They had one vitrine that was broken and one wall that was damaged. I don't mean to laugh, but I love the fact that people are making a mad rush to Saul. Today's Saul's former home and studio hold his archive and is an office for the foundation. It is a very busy place with projects going on all the time. And as you may now have come to understand, the archive cannot survive on its own. It requires attention and love. Saul's special archive has been tended to by more than just me. It has had the attention of a small group of dedicated helpers, many of which are here tonight, who have tended to and protected every item in it. And there are many others, including the Foundation's board, as well as a strong circle of professionals who deserve credit for guiding the archive safely into the future. The discoveries and inspirations we find here are endless, and we can only hope that the world will continue to agree. And before I let you go for the night, I've given this talk a few times, and I always like, in the end, to sort of bring Saul out and give him the final word. Nothing seems more appropriate. When it came to making up a title for the film, Thomas, like me, felt that being with Saul was an educational experience, an enlightenment in the way that Saul became our teacher, and that our view of life was never to be the same. So in the end, Saul did not become a rabbi as his family had expected him to, but became instead an entirely different type of spiritual leader. So finally, Thomas came up with a very appropriate title, In No Great Hurry, 13 Lessons in Life with Saul Leiter. I have a 5-minute clip here to show you. And Saul talks about his work, again, in color and his use of color slide film. And at the end of the clip, you'll see Saul and me cleaning up. At one point, Saul became committed to the idea of cleaning up, which I have always thought was one of his last heroic acts.
Well, at some point I began to use color and I discovered that they came in boxes. You know, you bought a roll of color, you had it developed, that you didn't have to cut it up. It already came in little boxes, slides, and that was quite nice. And I liked what I saw. I enjoyed looking at some of my color pictures. I thought they were rather nice. And so I saw nothing wrong, and of course some people thought it was a waste of time that I was taking color pictures. What are you going to do with all these slides? Why don't you get rid of them? Why don't you this? Why don't you that?
What did you do with them?
Well, I kept them in cabinets. There was a fire when a lot of them were sprayed. But the point is I enjoyed doing it, and I didn't share the opinion of those people. And the truth of the matter is there have always been people who like color. It's not as if I was the only person. I've been described as being a pioneer. Am I a pioneer? I don't know that I'm a pioneer. I think eventually it'll turn out that many people did color. I mean, I think if you know enough about photography, you realize that nothing is really that new. If you really knew what has been done and tried by other people, you'd realize that nothing is terribly new.
Does it annoy you that people call you a pioneer?
No, I'm not annoyed. Maybe I am, maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm part of a small group. I don't know. I don't care. I don't mind one way or the other. There's too much, isn't there?
There's a lot.
It's just too much.
What's this?
See, I'm all tired, and I need a rest, and no one lets me rest. Oh, that's it. What?
It's empty, except it just has some chords.
Yeah. It's connected to this.
Yep.
He's photographing us. What is he doing? That maniac. It's all Margaret's fault.
It's my fault.
Yeah, it's all your fault. You're nice to people and it's your fault. I bought this set. I like these. These are old English. I think it was 48 cents, which I thought was reasonable.
Are those slides?
What?
Are they slides?
The boxes and things that Soames and I bought. See? But they're all empty, but I don't want to throw them away.
Okay.
I'll take them upstairs. Okay, this I think can be thrown out. It had a stick. He's documented the most sordid aspects of my life.
Oh wait, so what? I said Saul was going to get the last word, but I just wanted to say this, that watching my friend Saul achieve the admiration that he always deserved has given me endless pleasure. It's a great story to tell, and I am so fortunate to be able to tell it. So thank you all for letting me share the story with you tonight. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm curious about the family. Did he keep up his relationship with them, specifically his sister?
His sister unfortunately had a mental illness and was institutionalized probably when she was 30 years old, so he wasn't able to keep up with her. His mother wrote him letters as far as we could see throughout his lifetime, and when she passed away, he was there. But the other family members, no, not so much. Yeah. Oh, I just wanted to say before we go on to the next question that I thought I had lost this print. Well, there was only one print. I thought I'd lost this image, and we've been looking for it for an entire year because a publisher in Canada wants to use it as a frontispiece. And we've been looking, and I've just been pulling my hair out. And today, Anders, who's here, went down in a basement locker, looked in an old family photo album, and there it was. So he's back, the man with the green shirt. So we're really happy. And I mean, I don't know what you think, but I really believe this might be an early selfie.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I've always been struck by his unique style, and I find it almost meditative.
Yeah.
And I wonder, in the time that you spent with him, in terms of his theory of photography or what he was trying to capture, what did you learn that kind of made up his style?
Well, I think I once asked Saul, I said, is this a form of meditation for you? You're every day, you're just painting and you're photographing, you're constantly in this mode of it seems almost meditation, like you're present, you're very present. I don't think he wanted to accept the word meditate, so he said, no, that's not the word. But I think Saul was a very present person, and I think that he was always inspired by the littlest things in the world around him. He often referred to those little things as being beauty, and I think the photographs certainly speak for that, yeah.
Well, Margaret, we're at a school, and obviously Saul had his opinions.
Yes.
I would like to know, and I love that he bought like 24 digital cameras. I think that's great. Kodak thanks him too.
Yeah.
But what advice would he give to students nowadays?
Ooh. Well, he might give you a really sarcastic answer right away. He'd say, "Get out," or something. But I think he would probably say now, if he had a chance to look back on all of this, is just to go out into your world, your daily life, even if it's just a few blocks around where you live, and look at things. Yeah, that's what I think he would say. Yeah.
Any other of course, in the back row. Thank you.
Hi, I don't really have a question, but I just want to say that being in this talk reminds me of Bernice Boy and Eugenia Jett a lot. Having someone to look after the entire lifetime's work. It's a lot of work, and thank you for doing it. And I think the work that you're doing is very valuable.
Oh, well, thank you. That's so nice. I appreciate it.
Was his work affected at all by the loss of Soames? Like, did he go through a period where it affected him in his ability to photograph and paint? Or did he just work through it?
No, thanks, Greg. That's a great question. So Soames passed away in 2002. Saul still was in a long period of having no money. I know that he painted during that time. He sort of slowed down taking photographs, but then something remarkable happened. A new technology kind of found him, and it was that SLR that Olympus had given him. And he realized that he could take a photograph and turn the camera around and look at the back of it. Not quite like slide film, because slide film to him was also incredible in the 40s, because he could take a picture, he can send it to Eastman Kodak, and they would send it back, and it would already be a positive. He didn't have to go into a dark room. It was already a positive, so he was able to see his work right away. And I think digital photography, and I have to mention this because this is a series about digital masters, right? I think inspired him to return in a way to photography. So he took up shooting again every day. He always carried a digital camera with him after that point. He didn't have a film camera that you saw him with. They were still around, of course. I have to add, though, that I think that the photographs that he took digitally are the same Saul-inspired stylistic images, his same sophistication that he had 50 years early working in analog film. So I don't think his style changed. I think he was really consistent that way. Yeah.
Why should it change?
I don't know. You know, sometimes you look at an artist in a museum and you see stages that they go through and they change. They don't necessarily become worse, but they might evolve. They become something different.
They change because they change.
The world has changed.
But it's not because it's a digital. I mean,
yes.
If you have a style, you have a style. If you change your style, but
yes.
I don't think digital should make you.
No, I didn't mean to say that. I meant to say that you'd think that maybe in the last 20 years of his life he might be a different kind of photographer, but he wasn't. He really remained consistent. The world changed. But he remained consistent even in digital. Yeah, absolutely, I agree with you.
I have a question about his family because.
Oh yeah.
his father, you said, just gave up on him.
Yes.
Was his father? I know. I understand he was Orthodox. Was he a Satmar or?
I don't know that term. They weren't Hasidic. They were just very, very Orthodox. They practiced all the holidays, and they wore the Orthodox.
Right, but there is
not
two movements, and when you speak about a Satmar, they will actually almost sit Shiva on somebody that moves away from.
His father did that. Yes.
His father set Shiva on him.
Yes.
Okay.
Not Shiva, but the other word for it, the rites for a funeral. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
sadly. Yeah.
I have two questions, Margaret.
Sure.
When he started doing digital work, and he ended up with a digital file,
Yeah.
who took the file and did what? I don't imagine he went into Photoshop and put it, worked up the files.
Yeah.
So that's the first question. And
Oh,
then
yes, okay.
the second question is, what are you going to do with his recent images? We all know his work from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, but what are you going to do with the work he did the last 5 years of his life, let's say?
Yes, okay, okay. The digital files, he kept them, of course, on all the cards, and when his card was full, he took the card out, he put it away, he got a new card. It's a good thing, you should do that, right? We did back them up at one point because we were getting a little bit worried. And at one point he had a friend, a former assistant in California, who put it all on little printout sheets that Saul could look in a binder. Saul had a laptop, but it was hard for him to figure out how to use. I'm stepping on that again. He took, in the end, 5,000, I think more than 5,000 photographs digitally from, working 2004 until he passed away, so almost 10 years. And we printed some of those with Philippe Lamont, and they were included in the Hamburg show in 2012, maybe 5 or 6 of them. So he did get to printing just a few of them. But again, just the tip of the iceberg. And also his, to go back into his work in color overall, he's always said that the world had only seen a tip of the iceberg. And it's true, the world has only seen maybe 200 images or 300 images in color, and we have 300,000 slides. The last year of his life, he put together a show of images that had never been printed before, not digitally, but in analog. And we sat upstairs, there's a picture that I showed here, and he's sitting at the light table, and he just selected what was within reach from a room full of slides. He picked out 100, and then he ended up printing 36 with Philippe Lamont as Fuji Art Archive prints, and they became part of an exhibition in Antwerp. So he was actively, to the last two questions, which are great, he was actively working in photography, which was wonderful for him. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much.
My pleasure.
It's very inspirational.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Be here, and I really enjoyed putting together some images for you all to see tonight, and I heard that this crowd likes pictures, and it looks like you do. So I've got lots of pictures. So let's get to it. So I'm pleased to show you images from Saul's archive today. My hope is that these images will reveal to you a little bit about who Saul was, and perhaps give you a better understanding of his archive and its future. So if you can imagine, this talk is kind of like a large puzzle with many pieces, so it may first appear a little abstract, but bear with me. I'll go back and forth between recent history, the past, the future, and in the end I hope that you'll leave here with a really more complete picture of a very special artist. So let's get started by going way back, say mere 70 years, and it's 1946. A 23-year-old Saul Leiter has quit rabbinical school and moved to New York City to pursue painting. What possessed him to make such a break for it? And what gave him the idea that he actually might survive? He defied his father, he defied his family's expectations of worldwide adorations. In his 80s, he saw an appreciation that he had certainly not asked for, not even waited for, but nevertheless rightfully deserved for so many years. To many still, Saul Leiter remains a mysterious character, not well explained, not easily explained, an artist who in the last few years seems to have suddenly risen to fame. So who was Saul Leiter, and where has he been? These are the types of questions I most often get when speaking with audiences today. I don't know if you can recognize it, but it's actually a Veselka in the East Village. It's hard to even begin describing Saul as a person. Being with Saul was a resonating experience. He was full of insight, he was wise, funny, lovable, superbly smart, the best conversations you've ever had. He could quickly put you in your place, so you had to be careful with your opinions and be sure to explain yourself well. He was so much fun to goof around with. He could crack up laughing to such a point that you would worry that he might pass out. He had a slow and plodding way of speaking, and actually I have a little bit of audio. This is Saul, that he would become a studied rabbi. He takes a bus, he lands in New York. His mother sends him some money, infrequently. He has a sweet and concerned Aunt Esther in Brooklyn, who may have fed him a dinner or two. He sleeps in Central Park a few times. He manages to rent a series of unfurnished rooms and sleeps on floors. He tries his hand as a meatpacker and a messenger boy. He paints with gouache and casein on paper placed on the floors of his various rooms. His friend, a painter named Richard Poussadart, gives him the idea to pick up a camera as a way to make money. Later, also his friend, the photographer Gene Smith, gives him a camera, and the rest, they say, is history, or in Saul's case, mystery. Now, let's flash forward several decades, and starting in 2006, after a life mostly in obscurity, Saul's work has experienced a surge of popularity. Especially his color work. Today, he is considered by many to be one of the great masters of photography, and possibly even one of the great colorists of the 20th century. In the last 8 years of his life, Saul experienced a sort of funny limelight, talking about the history of color in art, and it was something that he liked to talk about a lot. It's just about a minute.
I mean, the history of art from the beginning of time is a history of color. The great Renaissance paintings, the great Impressionist paintings, they're full of color. Degas said somewhere he'd like to spend I think he said that he would like to spend his lifetime drawing just a hand in black and white, something like that. But the fact remains that he did make thousands of paintings of color. I think the art world is afflicted with mistaken notions during certain periods, and they become very prevalent, and people take them very seriously, and then eventually they're abandoned and seen as rather silly and unimportant. Color has always aroused suspicion in the minds of certain people.
Food for thought. So to continue describing Saul, I think it's important to recognize that he was a painter at heart. Saul had a passion and an incredible knowledge of art history. He was completely self-taught.
Hello, and welcome to the I3 lecture series hosted by the Masters in Digital Photography program at the School of Visual Arts. We are thrilled to welcome Margaret Erb as tonight's guest speaker. Margaret is the founder and director of the Saul Leiter Foundation, which is dedicated to preserving the art and legacy of Saul Leiter, a true pioneer of color photography. Starting in 1996, Margaret closely assisted Leiter for over 18 years. She has worked on several books for the artist, including Saul Leiter Early Color and Saul Leiter Early Black and White. In 2012, she helped produce the exhibition Saul Leiter Retrospective at the House of Photography, Deichtorhallen, Hamburg. She's co-producer of the film Saul Leiter in No Great Hurry, released in 2013. Today, Margaret maintains Leiter's extensive archive located in his former home in Manhattan's East Village, and she is currently working on a digital catalog raisonné and several upcoming publications on Leiter's art. So please help me in welcoming Margaret Erb to our lecture series.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I am so happy to